This is nothing but that sports talk. Yeah, the WNBA season is literally days away as I welcome to this episode of Nothing But That Sports Talk. And who better to talk W with than this beautiful young lady with the W hat on, Erica Ayala, who's now the founder of Black Rose Media. She's not just doing the W these past few years, gentlemen, but she's also been doing some hockey as well. I mean, it's good enough that you got the NWSL hockey league on your belt, but you actually did an NHL game, the New Jersey Devils in particular, even though they didn't really make the playoffs. But the Rangers did. They're down 1-0 after losing in overtime to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But that's a subject for later on in the day. But we got to talk about the W. Like, I want to get your impressions on the way last season went with the New York Liberty being back in the playoffs, to the Vicks Mercury return to the finals, the Chicago Sky get a championship, and what Kansas Parker described as a season not to be proud of.
Yeah, I think there was so much that happened in the W season. Well, first of all, I should say, Rafiq, thank you for having me back. Always good to talk with you, brother. I love seeing you around the WNBA circuit. We need more Black creators, which you mentioned. I launched Black Rosie, so hoping to uplift certainly Black women, but folks like yourself as well. So I don't want to be remiss by mentioning that. So thank you as always for all that you do. But yes, regarding the WNBA season, I think what we learned is that this is a competitive league. We're in that cycle again, Rafiq, as you and I are speaking, where we're seeing how brutal cuts can be. I mean, you talked about the Chicago Sky. Obviously, a lot of people were focused on Candace Parker, and rightfully so. But I mean, if you look at the story of Lexi Brown and how she wasn't even on a roster heading into the season, got bounced around a few times and made a home in Chicago and won a championship with Chicago. We saw also that Layshia Clarendon got bounced around, started with the New York Liberty, ended up with the Minnesota Lynx, and was really that leadership piece that the Lynx felt they didn't have coming out of training camp. But then they got waived. Layshia Clarendon just got waived by the Minnesota Lynx. They also waived Crystal Dangerfield. I think as you start seeing some of these cuts, it's hard as a guard to make Exactly. It is really hard to as a guard to make a place in this league. So I think we're seeing a lot of storylines be similar, but almost amplified. And of course, we can't end we can't go through a segment in talking about WNBA without talking about Brittney Griner. I think right now what we're seeing is, we saw that the league and the WNBPA have some ways that they want to honor Brittney Griner, but it's such an interesting and quite frankly awkward, uncomfortable situation, because the U.S. government has finally made a determination that after several months of being detained, they see it as a wrongful detainment. So we're hoping that Brittney Griner, not just as a U.S. citizen, but as a U.S. Olympian, multiple gold medal winner for the United States, that the United States will really get involved here and bring Brittney Griner home.
Yeah, unless Brittney Griner wants to play like a little prison type escape and just leave Russia to try to swim her way back into the U.S., she's gonna have to go through a long process. And this is the same. But it feels like yesterday she blocked the shot that prevented her from getting back to what would have been her second consecutive WNBA finals. Now she's wrongfully detained. I mean, to be fair, we know that drug charges is a very serious issue in any parts of the world, whether it's Russia or Antarctica or even America. But she did not deserve to get detained for more than 10 years. That's literally the rest of her WNBA career right there. And I'm sorry that I never really got a chance to talk about the Brittney Griner situation in the past several episodes with my guy Ryan Walker, who I introduced you to the last time he was on the show, because you had the NFL playoffs going on, you had the NBA, you had March Madness, you had so much going on. Of course, the WNBA draft, you had the free agency. So I'm sorry that I never really got to touch on it as much, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a serious situation for a WNBA player, and not just a player, but a basketball talent, a human being like Brittney Griner, who's obviously one of the most iconic talents you'll ever see in the WNBA. And I hope she comes back very soon.
Yes, indeed. And, I think, again, part of that is because there were reports from the basketball community that Griner's family didn't want her talking about that. I am not disagreeing. I can't say that I've ever spoken to anyone from the family. So I take that, on the word of people who are saying it. That being said, as an American citizen, as someone who knows what it's like to be a Black woman in this country, let alone anywhere else, it's a bit baffling. And quite honestly, it scares me that Brittney Griner has not been more of a conversation. So I'm hoping that that changes. It does also seem like some of the things that we're doing to celebrate Brittney Griner, they seem a little bit disjointed, or they don't seem directly related to getting her home. It's almost akin to what you might do for someone, if I'm being honest, who's passed on. And that also makes me uncomfortable. I don't think that personally, I think that there are things that we as concerned citizens can do to support Brittney Griner, and I hope that we find ways to do that. I'm not knocking what the WNBA or the WNBPA is doing, because again, I feel like they're in a tough position, but again, we're taxpayers, we are concerned citizens, and we have every right as per the country that we live in to express that. And I hope more people do that on behalf of Brittney Griner, not getting into the conversation on why isn't there more coverage, and just do it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how dangerous it is to be a Black woman detained literally anywhere in the United States, abroad. We can look to Sandra Bland. We can look to what happened during apartheid. There are so many examples, unfortunately, of women's bodies and then Black bodies. So as a Black woman, you put those two together, and unfortunately, this is a very serious matter. And I know it's not comfortable for everyone to talk about, but I wanted to use some of the time here to break down some of that discomfort, because it is a very serious matter.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very serious matter. Like, I was on the WNBA Zoom calls for Chicago Sky. Liberty talked about it. They talked about Brittney Griner. There's a lot of uncomfortable discussions, and people commented on the YouTube video where they were supposed to say too much Brittney Griner questions. Just get to the basketball. But yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna end it right there. We'll probably talk more about this. You're probably gonna hear me talk about this a little bit more with Erica Ayala. When this girl Aya Adi, who's currently a student at Arizona State University, literally a diehard Phoenix Mercury fan. Shout out to her for completing her first year in college. She's gonna be doing some work for the Phoenix Mercury. She's a diehard Ari Chalmers fan. You know Ari, the one that interviewed you yesterday and highlight her on YouTube Live. I saw some of that. And you got into a lot of discussions about your business, so the business, Black Rose Media. So it's like just so engaged going on with women in sports, and it's good that I get to discuss that. Now on to some off-season deals. Well, switching gears real quick to New York Liberty. As I mentioned earlier, they barely made the playoffs after only winning 2 games in the second half of the season. They were below average to start the year off, but then they kind of tumbled a lot. But let's be fair, they had to face the Mercury, the Seattle Storm. They should have at least defeated the Los Angeles Sparks or the Dallas Mavericks, but they end up making the playoffs anyway with losses to the Mystics and the Sparks in the final day of the season. Do you see the New York Liberty getting back into the playoffs after what you witnessed last year?
Right now, I would say no. I think that they got lucky to get into the playoffs last season. It came down to really just different scenarios. I don't see the New York Liberty making the playoffs. I don't know. That being said, it's not an indictment on Sandy Brondello. I have been preaching for quite some time that the New York Liberty needed an experienced coach, and they definitely got one in Sandy. I still think the New York Liberty are short, as is a lot of the league, to be honest. I'm not fond of positionless basketball. So again, I mentioned all the guards getting waived, and I'm still not completely convinced that the New York Liberty have enough experience. And I mean that in the WNBA. I mean veteran WNBA experience. We see time and time again that matters. What was the difference for Chicago? Candace Parker. And that's not a knock on Allie Quigley or Courtney Vandersloot, but it took someone like Candace Parker to get a very good Chicago team past the hump. They had to get through the hump. We've seen the Las Vegas Aces, a very good team, still not make it all the way through and win a championship. We've seen the Connecticut Sun, another very good team, well-coached team, still not make it through. So having a staple, having a veteran staple of someone who's been through the ringer at the peak of WNBA competition, like a Candace Parker, absolutely makes a difference. And the New York Liberty don't have that yet. So we'll see. I know they have Dolson. I like that they got some size with Dolson, but I still think it's going to be a few years before the Liberty can really be a consistent team.
Exactly. And you know what? I've been seeing some ahead for a long time now. Like you mentioned, they got to compete. We mentioned in the losses that they did had, they got smoked by the Chicago Sky 2 days in a row. They got smoked by the Mercury 2 days in a row. The one game where they dared to play Sue Bird and Stewart, they got smoked at the Barclays Center. And even though they came out hot at the beginning of that game when they had to play it down in Washington, they couldn't even protect that lead. And that just shows that the defense is just so passive on the inside trying to guard Brittney Stewart. I was like, oh, crud. I mean, all you can do is just pray to God they miss. I mean, Sabrina Ionescu got out to that hard start, but that tends to cool off a lot. We saw more Sabrina Ionescu than we did at the NBA bubble, to be fair. I mean, she had one of the most memorable shots to open up the season against the Indiana Fever, but that's the Indiana Fever. We know the Liberty can compete with a rebuilding team like the Indiana Fever and the Washington Mystics, but when you going up against teams like the Connecticut Sun, the Aces, the Chicago Sky, you might forget anybody, the Seattle Storm, the Minnesota Lynx, even though Celia Faust is in the final year, but obviously they're still going to be somewhat relevant because they had that extension with Nafisa Collier. The Liberty, they're good against the lower to middle tier teams, and when they face up the title contending teams I just mentioned, they always run into a blowout city. I mean, they got smoked by the Aces 2 games in a row. Heck, they lost by double digits all 3 times against the Aces. Oh yeah, and not to mention they did lose 2 out of 3 to the Atlanta Dream. Like literally when I witnessed Courtney Williams hit the game winner off the Liberty in what was the only overtime game that actually was played at the Barclays Center. It was sadly, that was my first time actually being at the Barclays Center and meeting you, Miles, and Jackie Powell in person for the first time. But the way the Liberty progressed, I mean, it's good that they managed to improve by 10 games, and it's nice that they had Stephanie Dolson. But in my mind, I think they can get out if they made the playoffs, I think they can get out the first round, but they had to avoid the title contending teams like the Connecticut Sun, Aces, and the Mercury. There's no way of getting past that. Oh yeah, the Chicago Sky.
Yeah, I think the New York Liberty have a long way to go. I think that their series against Phoenix was actually interesting, but I mean, a Sandy Brondello team is going to be a team, at least based on her experience with the Phoenix Mercury, where you kind of see this up and down. I get the sense that Sandy, she has a way of pushing her players, but not in a way where everything is tight. She likes her team to play within themselves and within their skill set. For me, sometimes on the outside looking in, I think that's been why we've seen some of these roller coaster seasons for the Phoenix Mercury, but at the end of the day, they know how to win games. So I'm very curious to see how Sandy Brondello will be with a New York Liberty team that has none of that pedigree, at least not in the WNBA, and again, has not been a consistent team since the since the late 90s, the early years of the WNBA. So this is not a Sandy Brondello issue. It wasn't a Walt Hopkins issue. It wasn't a Katie Smith issue. These things for the New York Liberty have even before Bill Laimbeer. Unfortunately, if you really take a look at the track record of the New York Liberty franchise, they really have not been able to garner much consistency. And even when Laimbeer was getting to the playoffs, they were sputtering out in the Eastern Conference championships. And so that to me essentially is not a consistent team. And we saw that when we moved away from conferences, the New York Liberty found themselves on the outside looking in because they weren't a top team in the league. They were a top team in the East, but not in the league. And so the New York Liberty is a franchise that you can absolutely look to. When the playoff format got changed, that changed things for the New York Liberty.
Yeah, exactly. Because look, when they had to get through these single elimination games, they couldn't win a single game. And I talked about this. They ran to the Phoenix Mercury at the guard where Diana Taurasi had that shot that put them up by like 6 or 7 or something like that. Then another year they faced the Washington Mystics, and Christy Tolliver had literally the best shooting performance of her life, knocking down like 9 3-pointers. I remember watching those games, and when I look back at those highlights, it was Christy Tolliver hitting 9 3-pointers at the Garden. And just like I said when I was on the show, like we have an experience enough MSG misery when it comes to basketball. I mean, if you watch the New York Knicks, you have a better idea of what the type of misery that fans have to experience for so long when it comes to suffering these playoff losses against teams with top stars like a Christy Tolliver or a Diana Taurasi. And then it wouldn't be in the playoffs again up until, of course, the loss against the Mercury in what was that, Grand Canyon University. Although sadly they had to play there because of some concert. And that's the disrespect that they give to these women. Let them play at their basketball court. Luckily, they straightened out later in the playoffs when they had to go against the Aces. And this is a lot. This is a lot to take in for this New York Liberty team, and they're bringing back that tall Asian basketball player, Hangju. And then Joshua
from China, yeah,
and Joshua Willoughby, she was out for a year because of an injury. Asia Durr, she hasn't played since 2019 when the Liberty were playing at that Westchester County Center. Thank God they pulled them out of that. And so they have to get adjusted. Not to mention their number 1 draft pick, Naira Sabali from Oregon. She's going to miss the entire season. So she's pretty much, Sabrina Ionescu restarted, having to miss a year due to an injury. So I can see why you said it's going to take 2 years for this New York Liberty team to get back to that playoff team. A team that can, well, not just a playoff team, but a team that has literally a winning record almost every year that we saw like in the early 2000s. So in my opinion, I got to win being like at least 3 or 4 games better. But with the Los Angeles Sparks improving, Washington Mystics possibly compete for a playoff spot, they're probably going to have a tough time.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of movement, and the WNBA playoffs, the way they're set up, that really that 7-8 spot, there's only 12 teams, and so there's a lot of separation once you really get once you're after 5-6 in the WNBA standings. That's just how the league has been going. We're seeing that a lot of teams are opting to take veterans that they'll pay a decent amount of money and really get to that veteran max. But then that means that they might be not even a full roster. So again, these are all conversations that if you've been listening, coaches, and especially coaches that also serve the GM role, Cheryl Reeve, James Wade, you think about, some of the conversations that they've been having, they've been leading and hinting that these were going to be tough decisions to make. I mean, I interviewed Cheryl Reeve, and she told me for an article that ran in the New York Times that it was like, playing salary cap gymnastics, and that's going to continue. And we know that the WNBA is expecting these players now to come from overseas, which means that now you'll have some of these younger players that are not going to be able to have as much overseas experience in order to prioritize the WNBA. And all of this is happening. I think it makes sense, but all of this is happening. I don't know that we're going to see another increase in salaries in the next CBA, but we still have several years before that's even a possibility. So the money is not necessarily going anywhere. It's stagnant for another several seasons, but the talent coming from the NCAA, and also talent coming or not going overseas. So these roster spots are going to be extremely difficult to make. And again, the teams, it seems like teams rather have veterans and pay veterans and shed a few roster spots than go by way of a youth movement. And right now, the New York Liberty have built a young roster. So they're going to have to be content to work with that. But we know the WNBA is a veteran dominant league. It always has been since the very beginning, and it likely will for a number of years. That being said, Rafiq, we do know that you mentioned Sylvia Fowles, but there's a lot of retirements expected to be announced. Some have been formally announced, some have been alluded to, but there's a lot of retirements that are coming in the next handful of seasons. So I wonder if we'll start to see the league as a whole tip to younger talent. But even then, I think the great equalizer will be how you are able to manage that talent and grow that talent. And that's a skill that goes underappreciated, in my opinion, by the coaching staffs, and something that I think in due time we'll really be looking at closely.
Exactly. And we already talked about Sylvia Fowles retiring. You're going to have Sue Bird retiring. You're going to have Breon January retiring. So that's literally half, 3/4 of a handful right there. And who knows who's going to be leaving the WNBA? Because, I mean, I don't know if you listened to the interview where Christina talked to Diana Taurasi during the Phoenix Mercury's media day. But when asking her about the retirement, she said she'll always stop when the body won't let her continue going anymore. You reach it, like, the players are going to reach that breaking point where it's like, you know what, let's just end. We thought we saw the last of a Sue Bird Diana Taurasi matchup at that playoff game where the Phoenix Mercury took them out in overtime. But everybody was saying to Sue Bird, bring Sue Bird back, bring Sue Bird back. That's how you know they're committed to watching this young lady play.
Yeah, one more year. I was actually there in Seattle for that game. They were booted out by Phoenix in that first round. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Sue Bird has come back for at least one more year. I mean, will she be kind of akin to, Brett Favre or Tom Brady? I don't know. Diana Taurasi saying that she has been one of those more consistent with what she's saying regarding retirement. But, it's funny that she mentions her body because Diana Taurasi has dealt with a lot of injuries and surgeries, including not knowing if she was going to be able to play throughout the WNBA playoffs last season. So I think it'll be interesting to see what that actually means for Diana Taurasi, because for some, listen, I respect what an athlete wants to do with their own body and with their career. And if a team is going to continue to give them a roster spot and they can make money, go for it. But again, you look at some of the injuries, you look at some of the time out Diana Taurasi has had. How many seasons is she going to be able to start, stop for Phoenix? Who knows? Only Diana can answer that. And every time I personally think, I'm like, I don't know, DT, this might be it, then she goes off. So I never underestimate Diana Taurasi. That's essentially what I have learned over the years.
Yeah, you also learn over the years that she could be a comedian in the press conference when my interview with her Bay Sports Center.
Oh, absolutely. She's a hoot. And we'll keep it real though, too, because, he talked about Black Rosie Media, but if you really ask Diana Taurasi, she is one of the people often targeted for maybe getting too much media coverage as compared to other Black athletes who have not the same, because not many people have the same list of accomplishments that Diana Taurasi is, but similar accomplishments, even players on the Phoenix Mercury team. She's definitely a target of that narrative, rightfully so. But also, if you ask Diana Taurasi straightforward, bluntly, she knows that over time, and over its seasons, the WNBA has not been great at marketing its players. That included her as a member of the LGBTQ community. And she knows that oftentimes that means not being great at knowing how to market Black athletes, Black women athletes. And then you add that there are Black queer athletes, and our society, generally speaking, has had difficulty figuring out what authentic marketing, for those players looks like. So I think it is something that's shifting. The tide is shifting. I would argue that it's because more Black women are being put in positions where they can be a part of marketing decisions. And finally, the WNBA is tapping into WNBA culture and the people who are following the WNBA. So I do appreciate always Diana Taurasi being willing to show up for a conversation. And, she definitely gives some sound bites and some amazing quotes throughout the years.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when she said 50. Oh man, I'm never gonna get over that. That was literally on my second time talking to Diana Taurasi in the Zoom, and she went crazy saying 50 after getting smoked by the Chicago Sky in the Game 3 of the finals. Obviously, if you was there in person, or even if you, obviously you knew what was going on back then, but if you was on it live, if you was there in person with Jackie Powell and all the people that were covering the Chicago Sky and the Mercury in the finals, you would get a sense of how funny it was right there. I was doing it virtually, but Diana Taurasi, man, she's something else. I have literally fangirl since day one. But okay, now we can transition into another team. Well, we already talked about the Chicago Sky. When I spoke to Candace Parker, she was happy with the ring, but she was not satisfied with the way that the team played. I mean, 16-16 in a championship season. It's okay. You were an athlete during your time in college. If your team has just as much wins and losses, but you end up winning a championship, or even if a conference, even if not necessarily the world championship, you get a conference championship since you played in college. And I know when you was playing in college, like not too many people will actually get to play in the tournament, depending on the record and level of competition. But to ask you this question, would you be satisfied with a championship in a 500 or below season?
Well, me personally, I mean, I am of the opinion that a win is a win is a win. So if you're asking me, that's what I would say, because I've never won a championship. So, I would take it. That being said, I think there's one thing about I was not a part of that conversation. I've been pretty focused on Black Rosie Media, but so I can't speak to exactly what Candace said. But from what you're saying, I think there's a difference between saying that you're not content with the performance of the Chicago Sky in the regular season versus saying that you're not appreciative of a championship. So that's what I would say. But I mean, Candace is calling out how Chicago played, like a lot of us were calling out Chicago for how they were playing last season. You can't deny that it was an up and down seesaw of a season. And again, I mentioned veteran leadership. When did things start turning around for Chicago? When did they find their
came back? And they became literally the buzzsaw to that championship. They became literally the buzzsaw to the playoffs, as Ryan Walker would put it. But before we continue this conversation, let's just listen to what Candace Parker said in the press conference. This is Ralph Fico, nothing but that sports talk. How does it feel to have the big Chicago Sky, the team to beat, as you guys are trying to go for the goal of win a championship, and you're going for your third ring in your WNBA career?
Say the first part again. How does it feel for
you guys going into the season as defending champs? Pressure.
It's definitely easier to be the hunter than the hunted. That's why there hasn't been a repeat champion in 20 years. And we realize we have a target on our back, and we're gonna have to play through that all year. But at the same time, I think when you're going in as a whole, you're trying to defend a championship, but day to day, it's the same. It's the grind of trying to get better every day. And I think that's where we have to narrow our focus, is not think about the big picture and not suck during the regular season, because we sucked last year. We were 16-16. We were terrible. So,
but you did win the championship.
Yeah, but you can't, this isn't like a, feel good movie. It's not going to happen again. You can't go 16-16 and win a championship. That's like, what is it? You're telling me there's 1 in a million, 1 in 100, 1 in a million. Nah, that's it.
All right, I understand.
The reason that leagues are moving to these single game elimination formats is because they're exciting, because these leagues are hedging on the fact that they have enough talent in the league that everything won't be top heavy. So no, the team that has the best record doesn't always win a championship. If that was the case, then we would have seen the Connecticut Sun and the Las Vegas Aces in the final, but we didn't. We saw the Phoenix Mercury and the Chicago Sky, who came through single elimination in the playoffs. So while I hear what Candace is saying, and again, she's absolutely right about Chicago, you can't say in a sweeping generalization that the best team is always going to win the championship, because again, Chicago was not the best team and they won a championship. And that's because leagues are, again, setting up playoff formats for them to be drama and for people to tweet about it or talk about it and garner support there. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that's where we're at in sports.
Yeah, that's how it goes. So you know what? I'm just gonna wrap it up right there, because I understand you got other commitments. I'm gonna just let it go right there. Thank you for stopping by, Erica, and I appreciate your time. And we'll get more into Black Rose Media in another episode or so, because I understand, and I don't want to hold you up anymore. So
no, it's all good. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a little under the weather, so hopefully I'll be feeling better. But always thank you, Rafiq, for having me. Like I said, appreciate what you're doing. And yeah, we got a long WNBA season, long-ish WNBA season ahead. So you know how to reach me.
Appreciate your insight. This is nothing but sports talk. Get you in the game.